Next up, we have Sarah. I'm always slightly terrified by her talks, but like in a good way. She always makes me want to go home and like burn my phone. And I think this talk's gonna leave me with the same feeling. So let's give a round of applause for Sarah.
All right, hi, I'm Sarah Edwards, and yes, I do kind of specialize. My MO for these conferences are what can I find on your devices that it's super creepy? I try to be nice about it, but I think it's something that folks should know that's on their devices. So this year's talk is going to be all about Apple Wallet. And I picked this one specifically because I think during the last, year and a half or so, a lot of people are going a little bit more on the digital side for a lot of their financial gain. So, touchless, cashless, that whole thing. So I thought Apple Wallet was going to be a pretty good topic to go through. So as my details are up here, I'll have them at the end as well. I did put out all the slides on the Talks Discord channel, so you can download them. I've specifically put those out there because I am going to have some screenshots. I do a lot of databases. There's a lot of data inside databases, so it might be a little tricky to see on the screens here, but you do have a copy of it. And if you aren't on the Discord, whether this is a live stream or not, they will be posted to my website, as I usually do for all of my talks later on. Just a little bit about me. I do, by day, I am Cellebrite, digital forensics researcher at Cellebrite. I do not do the exploity stuff. I do the forensics stuff. I think someone chat into the Discord channel is like, oh, are you gonna, throw all those new exploits in there? I'm like, I have no idea how to do that. That is not me. I am not dropping any exploits or CVEs or anything like that. I'm just a weird, creepy person. So that's my day job. And night job is doing SANS instructing. So I got the 518 class. It's more or less the only Mac class in SANS right now. And that's iOS and Mac forensic analysis and incident response. So I keep pretty busy. Other than that, I'm just researching all the things and maybe getting some sleep. All right, so there's a lot of terms that get flown around about Apple Wallet. We have Apple Wallet, we have Apple Pay, we have Apple Card, we have Apple Cash. What's the actual difference? Because everybody sort of calls it something a little bit different. So I kind of just sort of distilled it down a little bit here. So Apple Wallet is the app. Now, you sometimes may not necessarily see the app as it's an app self on things like Mac OS, but it is still kind of integrated behind the scenes. So we'll call that one Apple Wallet. A few other things like Apple Pay. This I'm going to go with more or less the technology. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff with Apple Pay. We also have things like Apple Cash, which is sort of the digital debit card version of that as well. And if you are lucky and cool enough, you get the Apple Card. Titanium. It sounds cool. And when you give it to everybody, they think you're the coolest person ever. But then they're always looking at it like, where's the number and all the things on it? So that is the Apple Card. So you can actually have the titanium version or, of course, the digital version on your mobile devices. All right, so we're going to start here with just the iOS app. I think this is where most people will use Apple Wallet within the applications themselves. I have certainly been using this for not just in the last few months or so, but for quite a long time. I do find it really nice to just have all of this stuff accessible on my iOS device. But now, coming from a security standpoint, you're like, well, it's got to store this information somewhere. How does it store it? Does it get synced? What can I pull off as a forensic analyst to, do all the creepy, cool stuff that I like to do? So a little bit about the iOS app. There are two primary sections, and I want to point this out because this is how the data is actually being stored on the device. So you have the top section. This is where your credit cards are going to be. You're also going to notice, and this is my actual one, I try not to put too much personal data in here, but yeah, there's going to be some personal data. I live in DC, so I have a transit card in here as well. So WMATA Smart Trip card. Got a bunch of credit cards in here. Yes, I fly United everywhere. I got a boatload of Apple Cash. Always forget to use Apple Cash, so yeah, I kind of racked that up. And of course, the fancy digital version of the Apple Card. So that's kind of the first section. Now, right down below here, you'll see that little spacer. This is where everything else is going to be stored. If you buy movie tickets, if you buy your boarding or you get your boarding passes, you have some loyalty cards. You can see I have my insurance cards in here. Your COVID vaccination cards might be in here if your state approves things like that. So you never know quite what you're going to find in there. And if you actually look on my device, I haven't scrolled down in this particular screenshot here, but now with iOS 15, they actually hide all of your old passes that are no longer relevant. I have about 200 something. Yeah, I keep that as digital litter, mostly just for testing purposes for a lot of my forensic analysis. Yeah, I'm sort of a digital hoarder, if you will. It's great from a forensics perspective. Now, a few other things that I do want to point out here, things like file paths. So I'm going to mention a couple of the file paths. Of course, in forensics, actually knowing where this data is going to be stored is going to be pretty critical. Now, I'm going to go a little bit later on in the presentation on how easy is it to access these files and directories and databases, because it's not always the same, and it's going to be a little bit different depending on what level of access do I have, and specifically with iOS access. So just a heads up with that. You'll see passes here, and I will talk about iCloud syncing of different passes. You're going to go find those under the ubiquitous cards. So ubiquity, a term that is often used when Apple is talking about all things iCloud. And where do you put old passes? I always thought this was cute. In your shoebox, right? So apple shoebox, those tilde directories, that's going to be in your mobile documents. The mobile documents is what all your iCloud stuff is syncing to. So if you do have iCloud syncing turned on, don't be surprised if you're seeing a bunch of different passes and tickets being stored in there. All right, so let's talk about the passes first. So I like to go over this one because this one I think is one that most folks, if you're kind of looking at your own devices right now, you're probably going to find on your devices. It's one of the easier things to find. They're also available in iOS backups, encrypted or unencrypted, of course, full file system dumps, your gray keys, your Cellebrites. Gotta mention the tools at some point as well. So these are some pretty interesting pieces. Now, like I said, I keep all of my cards, digital clutter. Now, I know that there's going to be some folks in here who are, as soon as they land, that ticket is gone from their device. So these things are not going to stick around persistently, but you might find that they are synced between different devices, assuming that iCloud services is turned on. So you're going to have a boatload of different pass types. I have, of course, a bunch of United tickets. I have hotel stays. I have insurance cards, loyalty cards, Starbucks cards, a ton of different things being stored in there. So when you go find these in the directories, and I'm using the ubiquitous one here from my own, this is from my own Mac system here, you're going to notice that there's these PKPass package directories. So they look like directories to me, but they are actually in a package format. And they have this really strange number, just a base 64 number. I haven't found any reason to unbase 64 that, but that's how it's going to be located in the database. So that's just a heads up there. They all kind of look a little bit strange with that one. Now, if we actually go into one of these PKPass directories or packages, you're going to find something that looks like this. There's a lot of logos in there, your United logos, your Progressive logos, whatever the ticket is actually for. The juicy bits are in that pass.json. So for once, it's not a plist file. It's actually a JSON file. Now, whenever you it's called ingesting a ticket, so you check in for your flight 24 hours ahead of time, and there's that little add to Apple Wallet number, or a little button there. That's the ingestion. You're actually intaking that PKPass file directory package structure and importing it into your device. So it is reading all the information from pass.json. So a few other directories in there, but I will get into some more of the details associated with those. So every ticket's going to be a little bit different, depending on what type of data the provider actually wants to put in there. So PKPass package, again, it's just a package. It's just a directory when I'm looking at it from a forensics tool. I'm going to open up pass.json. Now, what you're going to find is that the JSON is kind of a little bit all over the place. It really depends on the provider. Sometimes there's white space, sometimes there's not. So for this one, I'm actually throwing it to JQ. Just so you can see some of the different details that are going to be stored in there. You're going to have things like the identifiers for that. This one is just an eTix ticket. So just an example of what you might see in the GUI versus what the pass.json format actually looks like. I took the opportunity during the pandemic to actually go to a lot of the Smithsonian museums in DC when there's absolutely no tourists. It's amazing. But I would highly recommend doing that. But of course, right now you do have to get time tickets. So this is one of those tickets. So this one's going to keep track of some fairly simple things. It's just general admission. You got order numbers in here. So different order numbers, general admission, some time stamping, some description items in here. But just know that other tickets may have a lot more detailed information, specifically boarding passes. You can tell what seat you're in, what your mileage number is, are you sitting in business class? Do you have an exit row seat? There's a lot of different bits of details that are actually being stored in these PKPass files. All right, next up, now let's get to the juicy stuff. What is Sarah buying? What can I look to see? What cards does she have? Is she sending Apple Cash back and forth to her friends? Does she use the Apple Card? What other credit cards does she use? Does she use the transit card? Where is she going? When is she going? Just going to talk all about the main database here, and this is going to be the passes23.sqlite. So this database has been around for quite a few years. One thing, though, is if you look at this database, maybe let's say 5 years ago versus today, it's one of the databases that I have found that has drastically changed over time. Now, Apple changes their database formats and schemas all the time. Drives me absolutely crazy because I'm always having to change my queries to pull out the information that I want. This one in particular has been absolutely maddening for a whole different reason. It's the weirdest schema I have ever seen. It's just, I don't know what they're smoking when they were building this, what the developer was actually thinking. But just looking at these different tables, first off, we're looking at 166 tables. That's an insane amount. I know what some of these are containing. Some of them I have absolutely no freaking clue what's going to be stored in there. So we have some interesting things here. If you ever look for, some obscure fruits, they're going to be in here. You got your good old durian in here, your Keith. I'd like to think that maybe one of the developers is called Keith, and they're like, yeah, I'm totally going to put a table with my own stuff in there. I actually think it's empty, but I do think it's quite an interesting schema. So it keeps going, and keeps going, and keeps going, since 166 tables and whatnot. But once you start looking into the actual structure of some of these tables, what you're going to find is that it's, again, that security through obscurity. There are not these table names, these row names, these column names are not very helpful. What the heck is an A, B, C, D, E? I don't know. I actually have to go in there and figure that out, which means from a forensics perspective, when I'm trying to figure out a query to pull this information out, it takes absolutely forever. I can't just assume that the column number or the column name is actually what it is. Like, what's an E versus a M? I don't know. I got to kind of experiment. I got to do a lot of testing with this one. So this database in particular, giant pain in the butt. But it's got some really interesting pieces of information in here. All right, so let's first extract the cards and passes. So maybe you just want a quick listing, what kind of passes are in here, what kind of credit cards are associated in here. So what you're going to find with a lot of these screenshots is that I kind of go back and forth between a test device and my own device. So for the sake of trying to keep some of my personal information still private, you'll notice that some of this is still test data. So if you're like, oh my God, I can't believe she's showing this kind of information, I'm pretty sure I redacted whatever I wanted to redact, but you never know. You might get some useful information out of it. But this one is definitely one of my test devices. And we can see that I got the query here. I'm not going to show you the SQL query for each of them. Some of the other transactional information is quite a bit larger. I am going to release these queries as part of my Apollo project a little bit later on once I kind of polish it up just a little bit. But I do want to show you that there is some structure to this. I am joining a few different tables here. None of the fruit tables in this particular query. Those come out in other places. But this is just going to show me things like, when was this ticket or when was this credit card actually added to the person's Apple Wallet? So we have this ingested date here. This is going to tell me when this was ingested versus a modification date. So this is going to tell me, say if I ingest a airline boarding pass, if I get a seat upgrade or something like that, it wants to update the pass, it wants to change that, or maybe it's the gate has changed, whatever reason it gets modified, that timestamp is also going to be pretty useful to me to start putting context to this. So I'm using all this data to figure out what was the user doing at a particular time period if I'm used to trying to take this information and maybe pivot off of it, maybe look for other applications, other data files. Maybe I'm interested of when they were doing some traveling and things like that. So I have these timestamps. I have either if it's a card or a pass. You're going to notice that the cards here, you'll notice that they do sound like credit cards. It's Apple, American Express. This one's just a gift card. The WMATA, the Washington Metro transit card is in here. And they all have the bundle ID here of the pass type, paymentpass.com.apple. So that's a really big kind of identifier to say this one is more financially based versus, say, an Eventbrite ticket for a movie or an event or my Starbucks gift card. But this pass type here does provide a little bit of context. If I really need to know, for whatever reason, when was the last time that they changed or updated their Starbucks? Maybe that is part of an investigation somewhere. I'm probably going to go take a closer look at that card. Now, with that one, I'm probably not going to find too much information for their things like their Starbucks order and things like that, but that's going to give me some information to maybe go to the Starbucks application itself. Or maybe you get emailed receipts, so I might go to email to provide a little bit more context surrounding that particular event. Other things in here, and I'm not showing you all the different things that are going to be stored in these databases because you will never see all the different pieces on these screenshots. But like, the order. How do they have these ordered? The different account numbers here, so not the full account. You'll be very happy to know that the full credit card numbers are not stored in here, so that has been verified. I would be very surprised if somebody hadn't caught that anyway. And country code information as well. So if you've got a variety of different credit cards from different countries, that would certainly be of investigative value. All right, now how about Apple Cash? So you got the Apple Card, you get Apple Cash as well. So Apple Cash is more or less just debit. It's just digital cash. If I need to send, Patrick $20 for whatever, you'll take it? Yeah. Okay. You take 40. All right, you're driving a hard bargain here. So I'll send him a message. I'll go through the little applet that they have in the messages application and say, hey, here's $40. And thanks for, putting on an awesome conference in Maui, of all things. So super happy to be here. Totally worth $40, right? Yes, excellent. Maybe more than that. But yeah, so I'm going to see these. These are called peer payments. So I know it's not really an interesting term, but we are peers, and I am paying them. I don't know. Send and receive. So I can sort of take this database here. I can see the transaction date, the amount, how many bucks, what currency it's actually in, sent, received. Interestingly, the peer payment handle, which is going to be their Apple ID. And a memo. So if I say, hey, this is $15 for groceries, that's going to be added in there, provides a little bit more context. All right, so cool. So what can I do with this information? Well, if I really want to know for groceries, maybe that's a code word for something a little bit more interesting. Maybe I'm doing a drug investigation or something like that. I'm going to take a look at that. Maybe that time frame is of interest to me. And I'm going to go into things like the messages application. So sms.db or chat.db, depending on which platform you are on. I want to get more context. So I only see that one message. But what were they talking about a little bit before, a little bit after? So I'm going to just kind of move over there just to get a little bit more information. Maybe it truly actually is just groceries. You never know. Sometimes this stuff is kind of boring. So I could do that. So that is one way that I could use this in different investigations. Next thing in here, you got Apple Cash. You get daily cash with your Apple Card. So they do have those percentages that come back, 1, 2, 3%. You'll notice that I have a boatload of Apple Cash because I completely forget to use it every single time. It just starts adding up and adding up and adding up. So maybe at some point I'll buy myself something real nice with my Apple Cash. But they're also going to show that within the database. And it's also going to show that it's being adjusted back and forth. So if I get a refund for something, or if I, the payment got canceled or declined, they're going to adjust this every single day depending on what you get. And you're going to see those little messages within the application itself. Now, the transit card. So transit card is a relatively new, in the last maybe year or two, depending on what city you are in. But DC finally got it during the pandemic. So I was able to actually research this without, having to go anywhere, which is kind of nice. So it's kind of interesting to see some of the location stuff being brought out here. So it's keeping track of, and you see the map in here once you go into some of the screenshots, of which start and stop station that I use this information at. So it's keeping all of those different transactions in there. I know this one's a little bit tricky to see, but we do see things like the Latin longs for these stations. So of course you can always just do a Google search for, say, Clarendon Station in Arlington, Virginia, and you're going to be able to see that. So again, this provides a little bit more context. So now I can see, okay, they were traveling on the metro from here to here. You know, I can use this, you know, they couldn't possibly have done that murder in the next state over. But that doesn't mean somebody else had their device. So, you know, use that within reason, obviously. So, but it does provide, again, a little bit more context into the timeline, into the device usage of this system. Next up, the good old Apple Card transactions. So I just quite literally right before I posted these slides into the Discord, sorry, that's the fancy one. These are my recent transactions. So this does get a little bit personal, but these are all the things that I've been doing in Hawaii. So we can see a couple things here. My card got declined. Darn, right? For whatever reason, Apple Card, they do not have really high credit limits. So with the airlines and all the fancy flights and cabanas that I've been buying, oh, well, it actually is a really good example. You'll also notice somewhere, well, in the next screenshot that I actually do pay off my credit card as well. So it actually shows some really quite useful information. So I went to Tommy Bahama, had a couple drinks there, some of the ABC stores. I bought some new shoes, some new sandals, because, when in Maui. I took a couple of lifts. I went to the Clarendon Apple store. So all the different details that you're looking at within the application itself, the merchant information, the amount, the percentage back, how it was used. So sometimes it'll say like a credit number was used. I don't think I have an example of that one in here. All of these little different pieces of information could be part of an investigation. All of that's going to be stored in the database somewhere. It may not be completely obvious, but it's going to be stored in there somewhere because it has to be stored so it can be displayed in here. Another thing that I like to point out here is that a lot of these different entries, a lot of these transactions will also include very useful location information. So I got a couple of ABC stores, maybe not in the screenshot here, but I went to two. I went to one in Lahaina, and I went to the one that's right over here in Whalers Village. Now, if that's going to be part of my investigation, I want to be darn sure of which one that transaction actually was at, so that I can actually put a device at a particular location. So there is a whole other table with just location-based information. All of this lovely map information, all built into this same database. Now, here's the database output. So it looks really nice in the GUI. In the database, maybe not as nice to see. So I'm extracting a few different things here. Again, there's quite a bit more information, but just the status. Was it actually completed? Was it a declined transaction? Is it still pending? You're going to notice that some transactions do end up pending for a while before they actually go through. So whether it was purchased, whether it was a payment, whether it was a refund, all of these different types of transactions can really add to some useful information. So yes, I did pay off my credit card. US dollars, card type, payment type, all your standard stuff. Name, merchant category. There's actually quite a bit of more merchant information. And again, that just provides more context. Okay, which ABC store did she go to at a particular time? Now, one thing it's not going to tell you is, what did I buy at said ABC store? You have absolutely no idea. Now, one thing, especially with Lyft is great because, okay, I'm doing an investigation. I want to know where did they take a Lyft from. I see $119 here. That must have been a heck of a trip. For this one, this is actually a combination of a couple of Lyfts. So this is on 9/24. This is when I was flying out. So I went from home to Dallas, and then from OGG to, Lahaina, actually. So a couple of trips, they get merged in together because they try to do those Lyft transactions at the end of the day. So it's not just a single transaction or a single trip. I can't tell that from this database. So I do have to provide or get a little bit more context to start putting the story back together. In this case, if I was looking for Lyft, what does Lyft email you? The receipt. The receipt also contains a little map. The map has a start and end. It has the timestamps. It has the driver. It has a lot of information being stored in there. So this is a great database, but I'm going to have to use this in some other application data as well. All right, now once you start actually looking at all the data, I should actually mention, this one is just synced on the Mac. So I pulled this off of this Mac right here. All of these transactions were just done with the Apple Card, either the physical card or my phone. This was on my Mac. So once you start using Apple Card, it wants to sync everything, which for me is great. For you, you may not want that being synced in there. So Apple Card is very particular. It wants to be on all the different devices. I will kind of do a TLDR with all the syncing stuff in just a little bit. Now, how about if I have multiple cards? So, my card got declined. I'm going to use another credit card to buy whatever I was going to buy at that one store. So I'm using a bunch of different credit cards. I'm using transit cards. I'm sending and receiving Apple Cash transactions from all my friends with all my different Cabana rentals and things like that. So you might see something that looks like this. You see the cash pure payments, the purchases, going back and forth, back and forth. Now I'm going to look at the whole database and start putting all these together. So I'm not just going to focus on a single credit card. I'm going to bring it all together. So I can just sort of sort by the transaction date and see where I'm at. Quite literally, if you plot this out and start looking at all the merchant information, you can plot this out on a map and see exactly where I was at any given point in time. That is really useful investigative information. Now, this one's just my test device. We see a lot of different things in here. But we see I do go to Whole Foods. I go to Starbucks. I go to a bakery called Bake Shop. It's a fantastic bake shop in Arlington. I go to Phil's Coffee. You got to get some coffee in there as well. So it's going to show me, where does this person like to buy their groceries? Where do they get their coffee? Do they get coffee at the same time every morning? That could be potentially useful. We see patterns in this data as well. A few other database goodies here, because I know I'm running up on time here. Things like shipping information. You get a lot of things like the UPS tracking codes being stored in there. I've also put here the database table names, because this is where the fruit comes into play, apparently. Blackberries and passion fruit. A lot of the credit limits things for Apple Card is in oranges. More details are in raspberries and strawberries. Again, it's really weird why they use fruit names. And then they use just, normal table names like Maps Merchant. That has all my location, all those little maps associated. So those Latin longs, all the addresses, the phone numbers, that merchant information. And a bunch more transaction stuff. Again, 166 different tables, probably 90% of which I have absolutely no idea what it's storing. But it looks like so cool information. It's just not immediately obvious to me what the purpose of that is. All right, so a little bit of TLDR. Where is the data going? Now, as far as passes goes, think of the movie tickets, think of your airline tickets. If you have iCloud services, those are pretty much going to be synced across devices. Even if you're not seeing them within the app or on your Macs or your iPads, they do like to hang out in the ubiquitous cards area. So don't be surprised if you find those on there, even if you're not seeing them within the GUI themselves. Now, these are pretty easy to get to from a forensics perspective. I can do an iOS backup. I can do a full file system dump. I can jailbreak, see all the different things. Should be good to go. Now, as far as the Passes 23 database, this one is a bit trickier, and for the right reasons. It contains a lot of personal financial information. Now, one thing is, I could do a subpoena to a bank. I could subpoena the credit card information. The one thing that this saves me as a forensics person, it saves me all that extra paperwork. It saves the investigator extra paperwork. If it's right here, I might as well get access to that. So they do make it a little bit trickier to get to, but we're going to be able to get those with full file system dumps, jailbreak dumps, and assuming your Mac is not encrypted, or if the forensic investigator doesn't have, passwords and all that stuff, it does get protected. It's still quite available, however. Other credit cards, these are a little bit more interesting because they don't get synced. Apple Card loves to sync all the things. All the other credit cards, it's pretty much only the transactions that were done on that device. So if I only used one of my credit cards, the non-Apple card, on my phone, those transactions pretty much stay on that phone. It's not going to be synced across all the other ones. And it's not going to know, like, I just used the other card. There is no syncing between MasterCard or Visa themselves. Just the Apple Card does most of the syncing. And then we have transit. Again, this is on a per device basis. So don't be surprised if you're not seeing it because you're looking at Mac, because there is no transit information on the Mac itself. All right, so that is it. A little, I know, quite quick, but it's a big database. So thank you very much. There's a few other things I think folks should keep in mind, and of course I'm going to try to do as much research as possible. I'm very interested in the car keys. If someone wants to buy me a car that has the car keys, I would very, very happy to give that a go. I'm interested in the identification, if only from a legal perspective. You know, you get stopped by law enforcement, you want to show them your ID. What's going to happen? You just unlocked your device, which makes things a heck of a lot easier from a forensic acquisition point of view. So that is going to be certainly a very interesting thing to keep an eye on. Apple Family Cache. I don't share my cache with my family, so I have absolutely no idea. And there's a bunch of other stuff. So again, this is one of the databases and apps that keeps adding more and more and more information. Probably more fruits in the future. Maybe they're going to add more vegetables. I'm not entirely sure. SQL queries are going to be available on my Apollo project. So I've presented on Apollo here before, Apple Pattern of Life, Lazy Outputter, or all the creepy stuff on your devices, all nicely outputted for you. My blog is here. The slides are going to be uploaded to that, but you already have them in the Discord channel. The Forensics 518 class, if you're interested in seeing all the other stuff that I teach about, and of course my Twitter information if you have any other questions. So thank you. And not surprising, I still went over time.